Before we start, please like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends and family. Also, let us know where you're watching from and what time you're watching. We'd love to hear from you. From the outside, our life was flawless. The kind of picture-perfect marriage that made people whisper about us at dinner parties, envying the way David and I seemed so seamlessly in sync. I was proud of what we'd built. A beautiful home, a circle of loyal friends, and a career I had worked tirelessly to craft. And David? He was my biggest cheerleader, always at my side, raising a glass in my honor whenever someone mentioned my latest achievement. At least, that's what I thought. The cracks were subtle at first, the kind of things you brush off because they're too small to confront. David started making little remarks, almost like jokes, but with a sharpness that lingered. "Another late night? Don't work too hard. Wouldn't want to burn out and ruin all the fun," he'd say, flashing me that easy smile. Or, "You're really the star around here. I'm just the guy standing in the background." I laughed them off, told myself he was teasing, even though his words stuck like burrs in my mind. Then there were the shifts in his tone when we talked about my work. What used to be curiosity turned into disinterest. If I mentioned a win, a new client, a successful project, he'd nod absently, his focus somewhere else. And when we were with friends, he'd deflect attention away from me, slipping in comments about how hard it was to keep up with someone so driven. The way he said it, with a chuckle and a drink in hand, made everyone laugh. Everyone except me. I wanted to believe it was just stress. David's own job had hit a rough patch, and I assumed his frustration came from that. But it was more than stress. I could see it in the way his smile faltered when someone praised me, in the way he lingered at the edges of conversations, pretending not to hear when someone asked about his work. I started to notice how often he avoided meeting my eyes, like he was hiding something just out of reach. But I brushed it all aside. I told myself it was temporary, that he'd come around. He always did. That's what marriage is, I thought. Weathering the rough patches, trusting that the foundation holds strong. And David had always been my foundation, the steady presence that kept me grounded no matter how high I climbed. It wasn't until much later, when the pieces of his betrayal began to surface, that I realized the truth. The cracks weren't random or fleeting. They were deliberate. David wasn't struggling to keep up. He was tearing us down from the inside out, one careful thread at a time. And I, blinded by the illusion of our perfect life, had let him. The night I found the emails, I wasn't looking for anything in particular. David had left his laptop open on the dining room table, the screen glowing faintly in the dim light. He was upstairs, the sound of the shower running faintly in the background. Normally, I would have walked right past it, respecting the invisible boundary that comes with sharing a life. But something stopped me. An instinct, a whisper of doubt I couldn't ignore. The email subject lines were innocuous at first glance: project updates, budget discussions, client follow-ups. But one thread caught my eye. The subject was vague. Next steps. But the sender wasn't a name I recognized. My finger hovered over the trackpad for a moment before I clicked. What I saw made my stomach drop. David had been corresponding with one of my biggest competitors, a smug corporate type who'd spent years trying to undercut me in the industry. The emails were clinical, deliberate. They detailed strategies, upcoming pitches, even pricing structures. Information only someone inside my business would know. My business. David had been feeding them everything they needed to sabotage me. My hands trembled as I scrolled through the thread, each message a knife twisting deeper. The betrayal wasn't just professional, it was personal. David hadn't just sold my trust, he'd weaponized it, using the intimacy of our relationship as a tool to dismantle everything I'd built. The worst part wasn't even the content of the emails. It was the tone. David was calculated, dispassionate, like this was just another transaction. No hesitation, no second guessing, just cold, precise betrayal. When I heard the water shut off upstairs, panic surged through me. I quickly closed the laptop and stepped away, my heart pounding so loudly I thought it might echo through the house. By the time David came downstairs, towel draped over his shoulders, I was sitting at the counter with a glass of wine, trying to steady my breathing. "Late night?" he asked, glancing at his laptop as he walked past. There was no hint of guilt, no trace of unease in his voice. If anything, he seemed relaxed, smug even. "Yeah," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "Just catching up on a few things." He smiled, kissed me on the temple, and headed into the living room, oblivious to the fact that his secrets were no longer safe. I sat there for a long time, staring at the wine swirling in my glass, the weight of what I'd uncovered pressing down on me. Part of me wanted to storm into the living room, shove the evidence in his face, demand an explanation. But the other part, the quieter, sharper part, told me to wait. David thought he was in control, that I was still blind to his betrayal. Let him believe that, I thought. Let him think he's winning. It would make it all the more satisfying when I turned the tables and tore his perfect little plan apart. The decision to hire a private investigator wasn't easy. It felt like crossing a line, like admitting that the man I'd built my life with was a stranger I couldn't trust. But trust had already been shattered the moment I saw those emails, and the only way forward was to face the truth head on. Cole, the investigator, was no nonsense and direct. "You tell me what you need, and I'll get it," he said over the phone, his voice steady. I told him everything, about the emails, the competitor, and my growing suspicion that David's betrayal went deeper than I'd uncovered. It didn't take Cole long to dig up the skeletons in David's closet. The first revelation came less than a week later. David had been siphoning money from our shared accounts into one I didn't even know existed. Small amounts at first, hidden among routine expenses, but they'd grown over time, piling up into a significant sum. The account was registered under a name I didn't recognize, likely a pseudonym, and the deposits were methodical, calculated. He wasn't just sabotaging my career, he was preparing to leave me entirely, ensuring he'd have the means to walk away unscathed. The second blow came when Cole uncovered David's personal vendetta. He'd been spreading rumors about me within our social circle, painting a picture of me as overbearing, controlling, and untrustworthy. His whispers had started small but had grown louder, enough to make some friends hesitate when they talked to me, their smiles tighter, their words more cautious. It wasn't just professional sabotage. David was dismantling the foundation of my personal life, isolating me bit by bit. When Cole handed me the file, thick with evidence, bank statements, recorded conversations, and photographs, I felt a cold, hollow ache settle in my chest. It wasn't just the betrayal that hurt, it was the precision of it. David had crafted a plan so meticulous, so cruel, that it left no room for doubt. He wanted to ruin me, not just in business, but in every way that mattered. Sitting alone in the quiet of my living room, I leafed through the pages, each piece of evidence cutting deeper than the last. There was no denying it now. David had turned our marriage into a weapon, and I was his target. But the ache in my chest slowly gave way to something else. Resolve. He thought he could destroy me, that I'd crumble under the weight of his schemes. But he underestimated me, and that was his fatal mistake. I picked up my phone and dialed Cole again. "I need one more favor," I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. "I want him exposed." Every last detail. Cole didn't hesitate. "Consider it done." I hung up and stared at the file in front of me. David thought he'd planned for every contingency, but he hadn't planned for this. I wasn't going to fall apart. I was going to fight back, and when I was finished, there wouldn't be anything left of his so-called perfect plan. I didn't sleep that night. The file sat on the coffee table, thick and damning, a monument to David's lies. But I wasn't angry anymore, not in the wild, untethered way I had been when I first saw the emails. Now my anger was cold and sharp, like the edge of a blade. If David wanted a war, I'd give him one, but on my terms. The first step was securing my ground. Early the next morning, I called the bank. "I need to make some changes to my accounts," I told the representative, my voice calm, businesslike. By the time I hung up, our joint accounts were frozen, and my personal assets were shielded from any more of David's schemes. He wouldn't see it coming, not yet. Then I turned my attention to baiting the trap. I needed more, something that would expose David's entire plan and leave no room for him to wiggle out of it. Cole and I worked together to craft a piece of false information, a business opportunity too tempting for my competitor, and by extension David, to ignore. It was risky, but if he took the bait, it would confirm everything. Cole planted the details subtly, ensuring it looked authentic but traceable, and then we waited. David was predictable, almost painfully so. Within days, I overheard him on the phone, his voice low and conspiratorial. He didn't realize I was in the next room, just out of sight, listening as he discussed the fake opportunity with someone on the other end of the line. I couldn't hear every word, but it was enough to know he'd fallen for it. Cole was already in place, documenting the call and the subsequent steps David took to hand over my fabricated plans to my competitor. I kept my composure through it all, playing the role of the oblivious wife perfectly. At dinner, I smiled at David, laughed at his jokes, and asked about his day. He seemed more at ease, almost smug, as if he believed his plan was running smoothly. It made me sick, but I let him believe it. The bigger the lie, the harder it would hit when the truth came out. By the end of the week, the trap was set. The investigator had everything: recorded calls, emails, financial transfers, and even the false lead I'd planted. It was a clean, airtight case, one that painted David as a manipulative, deceitful man who had betrayed not only me, but everyone who trusted him. I sat in the quiet of the living room that night, staring at the file in my hands. The weight of what I was about to do pressed down on me, but I didn't falter. David had spent months tearing me apart piece by piece. Now, it was my turn. The difference was, I wasn't just going to destroy his plans, I was going to make sure he couldn't recover from them. David came home late that evening, his tie loosened, a faint smugness in the way he carried himself. He set his briefcase down by the door, glanced at me sitting in the living room, and smiled like nothing was wrong, like he hadn't spent months dismantling my life behind my back. The sight of him made my stomach churn, but I stayed calm. I wasn't going to lose control. Not tonight. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady. He paused, his brow furrowing slightly. "Can it wait? It's been a long day." "No," I replied, my tone leaving no room for argument. "It can't." He sighed, slipping off his jacket and draping it over the back of a chair. "What's this about?" I gestured to the coffee table, where the file sat waiting. "It's about this." David's smile faltered as he looked down at the neatly organized evidence. He didn't sit, didn't reach for the folder, but his expression darkened. "What is this?" he asked, his voice tight. "Everything," I said simply. "Your emails with my competitor, the money you've been stealing from our accounts, the lies you've been spreading about me to our friends." I leaned back in my chair, my eyes never leaving his. "I know, David. All of it." For a moment, he didn't speak. Then, he laughed. A short, sharp sound that had no humor in it. "You've been snooping through my things," he said, his tone accusing. "That's rich, Clara. Real rich." "Snooping?" I shot back, my voice rising. "You've been sabotaging me, stealing from me, ruining everything I've built while pretending to support me. Don't you dare act like you're the victim here." His face twisted, anger flashing in his eyes. "You're unbelievable," he said, shaking his head. "You're so obsessed with your career, so wrapped up in your precious work, that you didn't even notice what's been happening between us." I stared at him, the sheer audacity of his words almost taking my breath away. "What's been happening between us?" I repeated, my voice sharp. "You mean the part where you decided to destroy me because you couldn't handle being in my shadow? You pushed me to this," he shouted, his voice echoing in the room. "You made me feel like I didn't matter, like I was just some accessory in your perfect little life. And that justifies betraying me?" I said, my voice cold. "Justifies stealing from me? Lying to me? Trying to ruin me?" He opened his mouth to respond, but I cut him off. "It's over, David. I've already filed for divorce. Your accounts are frozen. And our friends? They know. Everyone knows. You're not the victim here. You're just a coward." David's face crumbled, the anger draining away, replaced by something smaller, fear. He tried to speak, to salvage what was left, but I didn't let him. I stood, picking up the file and tucking it under my arm. "You tried to ruin me," I said, meeting his eyes one last time. "But you only ruined yourself." Then I walked out, leaving him to the wreckage of his own making. The days that followed were like watching a slow-motion train wreck, except David was the only one aboard, and I was standing on the sidelines, untouched. Word spread fast. Our social circle, the one he'd quietly poisoned with his whispers and lies, turned on him the moment the truth came out. People who'd once laughed at his jokes now avoided him at every turn, their sympathy shifting toward me in a way that was both comforting and bittersweet. His reputation didn't just crack, it shattered. I'd made sure of that. The evidence I'd gathered wasn't just my weapon, it was my shield. When I sent it to the right people, his boss, his closest friends, even his family, it was like lighting a match to a carefully stacked pile of kindling. His employer, fearing the association with his betrayal and financial misconduct, severed ties almost immediately. David was left scrambling, trying to explain away the damning proof of his underhanded dealings. But there was no explaining his way out of this. His lover, my so-called competitor, cut ties just as quickly. The moment it became clear that their alliance was more liability than opportunity, they ghosted him entirely. David had overplayed his hand, and now he was standing in the ashes of his grand plan, alone. Meanwhile, I began to rebuild. At first, it felt fragile, like standing on unsteady legs after being knocked down. But the support I received from friends and colleagues was overwhelming. They saw me not as a victim, but as someone who had fought back, someone who refused to be destroyed by betrayal. That admiration became a source of strength, a reminder that I hadn't just survived David's schemes, I had dismantled them piece by piece. I focused on my work, pouring my energy into the things I loved. The career David had tried to sabotage flourished, bolstered by the very resilience his betrayal had forced me to cultivate. And with every new client, every success, I felt a little lighter, a little freer from the weight of what he'd done. David, on the other hand, wasn't so lucky. I heard bits and pieces through mutual acquaintances, how he struggled to find steady work, how people avoided him at parties, how his once perfect image had become synonymous with deceit. I didn't gloat, didn't revel in his downfall. That wasn't the point. The point was that he could no longer hurt me. Looking back, the betrayal had been a turning point. It stripped me of my illusions, yes, but it also gave me clarity. I had been so focused on building a life with David that I hadn't realized how much of myself I'd given away. His betrayal forced me to reclaim that, to stand on my own 2 feet and rediscover the strength I'd always had. I don't think about David much anymore. He's just a name, a chapter I've closed. My story isn't about him. It's about what I've built since. And for that, I'll always be grateful. It's strange how life can shift so drastically in a matter of weeks. Sitting here now, with the sun filtering through the curtains and a sense of calm settling over me, I can barely recognize the person I was before all of this. There's still an ache, of course, a phantom pain from wounds that cut deep, but it no longer consumes me. It's a quiet reminder, like a scar that no longer hurts but still tells a story. David's betrayal didn't just break my trust, it shattered the way I saw myself. For so long I had tied my identity to the idea of us, to the partnership I thought we had. His actions forced me to reevaluate everything, to dig into parts of myself I hadn't touched in years. At first it was painful, peeling back those layers, confronting the ways I had let his approval define my worth. But as the days turned into weeks, I began to find something unexpected underneath. Strength. I threw myself into my work, not as a distraction but as a reclamation. Every project I completed, every milestone I reached felt like proof that I could stand on my own, that I didn't need anyone to validate my success. The career David had tried to sabotage became the foundation of my recovery. It wasn't just about proving him wrong. It was about proving to myself that I was capable, resilient, and unstoppable. My personal life followed suit. I surrounded myself with people who truly cared, who reminded me of the things David had tried to take from me, my confidence, my joy, my light. Friends who saw me for who I was, not the version of me David had tried to paint. They became my anchor, their laughter and warmth filling the spaces his betrayal had left empty. As for David, I don't waste much energy on him anymore. The last I heard, he was still trying to piece his life back together, his name tainted by the very schemes he had orchestrated. I used to wonder if he regretted it, if he lay awake at night wishing he'd done things differently. But now I realize it doesn't matter. His regrets, or lack thereof, have no bearing on my life. I've moved on, and that's enough. This experience taught me that betrayal doesn't have to define you. It can knock you down, yes, but it can also show you what you're made of. It can strip away the illusions and leave you with something real, yourself. Stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever. I don't know what's next for me, and for the first time, that feels exciting instead of terrifying. This is my story now, and I'm the one writing it. David may have tried to ruin me, but in the end, all he did was set me free. Thank you for watching this powerful journey of resilience and reclaiming strength. Life may throw unexpected challenges our way, but how we rise above them defines who we are. If this story inspired you, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more compelling narratives. I'd love to hear your thoughts. What would you do if someone close to you betrayed your trust? Would you confront them head-on or silently plan your next move? Share your perspective in the comments below. I'm eager to read your stories and insights.